What's up guys, it's the Unhinged Engineer here, and today I'm going to make a video I have been putting off for a very long time, and that is my review of CS6475 Computational Photography. So I took this class last semester, so the fall 2025 semester. Been a good while since that class ended, and I'm currently taking no classes. Usually, I like to make these reviews right after I finish the class when all the thoughts are fresh in my mind, but to be honest, when all my thoughts about this class were fresh in my mind just after it ended, I was really pissed. And for the most part, I try to keep things professional on this channel, and so I waited to kind of cool down, be a little introspective, think about the class as a whole in hindsight, and provide you guys the best, most objective review of the course that I possibly can, while also factoring in my subjective experience, which I would assume at least is some part of the value proposition of this vlog series. So yeah, I'm gonna stop beating around the bush. In case you can't tell, this will be a pretty negative review. But yeah, today I'm going to talk about my experience taking computational photography as part of Georgia Tech's OMSCS program. As we usually do, I'm going to start off with some of the content in this class, then the assessments. After that, I'll talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of this course. Again, there will be a good amount of ugly to get through, and then my final score of it overall. So yeah, in case you didn't know, I'm the Unhinged Engineer. I make professional development content for young engineers like myself. I also am vlogging my Georgia Tech OMSCS journey, so I've taken 3 classes, including computational photography, currently taking a gap semester, but I did want to get this review out in case anybody has the misfortune of evaluating this course as I was doing, last fall 2025. So yeah, if any of that content interests you, definitely like, comment, and subscribe, but let's get right into this review. To start off with content, I'm just going to break it down here and just list it all out. Okay, so these are the broad strokes of content discussed and covered in the lectures as part of this class. It starts off with like the super basic concepts of digital imaging. After that, it gets into some of the hardware, so cameras, optics, and sensors involved in taking images and shooting videos. After that, it gets into image analysis, applications, and then ends with videos. The miscellaneous section is honestly basically nothing. None of it's required, and all of it was pretty relevant to the assessments and stuff. So I would say for myself, the best parts of this class, hands down, were the cameras, optics, and sensors part, as well as the imaging analysis and videos parts. The imaging analysis was actually the best because of the projects that we had to do. So out of all these subject areas, I probably had the most experience with image analysis because I've done a lot of computer vision, I've done a lot of signal analysis, which is pretty similar as part of my day jobs. And so naturally, I knew a lot about image analysis going in. However, the projects that we had to do were very interesting and asked us to implement stuff at a fundamental level, so I enjoyed that a lot. The cameras, optics, and sensors part is probably the subject area of this class I had the least experience in, and so naturally, I got a lot of value out of just kind of getting a base competency of how cameras work. These lectures get that across really clearly. And the videos, I enjoyed, like video processing, right? I enjoyed pretty much for the same reason as the imaging analysis stuff. This is kind of foreshadowing for the assessment section, but my biggest disappointment with the videos part was that as compared to the lectures, which are really good and taught lots of really interesting stuff, the assessments didn't really force any of that stuff out of us. And so that was a bit of a bummer. For the most part, again, I'm foreshadowing here, but I would say probably my favorite part of this class was the lectures themselves. They were pretty high quality. Okay, now let's talk about assessments. I'm just gonna list them out in order and kind of talk about, the quality of each. The first assignment we had to do was the camera obscura, which was pretty good. It was fun to build a little box. I didn't do it with my room, which effectively, if you don't know what a camera obscura is, it's just like a pinhole that's really dark on the inside, right? So it's either a box or they preferred that you do it with a room. I just did it with a box and I got full credit, didn't matter. So it's a pinhole where it's really bright on one side and really dark on the other, and you can project like a raw virtual image on the back wall of that dark room. After that, we had to do pyramid blending, which I would probably say was one of the best assignments we had in this course. It was really just a super basic application of frequency analysis at different bandwidths. Based on that, you can do some kind of sampling and filtering in order to blend images more seamlessly between one another instead of hard cuts. And yeah, while the application of these concepts was pretty basic, it was our first assignment with actual coding, and I do feel like the code we did have to write stressed those fundamental concepts pretty well, so I learned from it. The next one we had to do was the panoramas assignment. So the panoramas assignment was pretty interesting. The panoramas piece was kind of leveraging this concept of features that we learned about in lectures. So, if you don't know, when you're stitching images of a panorama together, you need kind of anchor points to make sure you maintain visual continuity throughout that stretched out image. And so the way we do that is usually with feature matching algorithms like SIF. Some feature matching there, and also some like image warping and stretching, right? So understanding the different ways in which you can alter the shape and size of images and how that maintains visual continuity based on the data is really, really interesting. Panoramas was a pretty cool application of these different things. I have mixed feelings about the panoramas because on the one hand, it was an interesting project. On the other hand, it was really, really difficult. Like the test cases were super painful. The bar for getting your algorithm to perform correctly on images that you create was really, really difficult. Like I would say overall it was a combination of really strict grading policies and not that good of a coding kind of environment. The function placeholders they provide you weren't really well spelled out. Yeah, it was like a 50-50 assignment overall. Not great, but not terrible either. I'm going to go through just the assignments first, and then I'll talk about projects at the end. So the next assignment we had to do was high dynamic range, where effectively you're taking images at different exposure levels. So exposure was another core concept of cameras and whatnot that I wasn't really familiar with before this assignment, and now I am as a result, which is good. But HDR takes images of the same scene at different exposures. If you take two images of the same scene, one high exposure and one low exposure, in the high exposure image, you're gonna get lots of really good visual content in those shadowed regions, right? Because you keep the aperture open long enough to get more light out of the darker regions of your scene. Now, by contrast, in those brighter regions, you could ultimately saturate and then start to lose visual information because too many photons are hitting the detector from that region, and as a result, it just goes to white and you can't really see anything. On a low exposure image, you might have the opposite problem where you maintain visual content in those bright areas, but on the flip side, the dark areas are just too dark and they fade to black, and so they saturate in the other direction. The point here is, for a high dynamic range image, you're synthesizing images at different exposure levels to maintain as much visual information as possible. And the last assignment was really a big bummer, and that was the GIFs assignment. So this was the assignment that corresponded to the videos section of the class, and effectively they taught us a bunch of really cool algorithms and different things you can do once you extend the concept of digital imaging out in time and you play out a photo or you play out a video, and all we had to do was just make GIFs, and we weren't even making GIFs. We would take a GIF and then run this it's called sum of square differences, right? So you just measure the sum of differences between different frames in the image, and we had to pick the frame of the GIF that was the best looping point to restart it, so there's no jump and it looks like it's continuous. It was a pretty stupid assignment that really taught us nothing. So that was a bit of a bummer, especially when compared to the video lecture content that was actually really cool and went through lots of stuff about, okay, now talking about stitching images together, how can we preserve dynamics? Can we even learn some kind of temporal dynamics in a video and then use that to do certain processing? It was pretty cool. I enjoyed the lectures for this, but the assignment, not so much. That was a bit of a bummer. So each of these assignments were worth 10%. As for projects, there were two. One was the object removal project, and the other was the seam carving project. Each of these were worth 15%, or one was 10 and one was 20. I honestly can't remember. Yeah, on average 15% each. These projects were pretty interesting. So the object removal project was very cool, and it combined several different concepts from different sections of the class, mainly in the first half, and I would say probably around here for the most part. The point of the project was to remove objects from photos. Now, in the modern day, iPhones and Google Pixels and all these different photo software, they have the ability to remove objects from photos, but most of those are deep learning based, right? So you have a neural network, a deep learning model that will literally just estimate what should have infilled that, and then you're ready to roll. But back in the day, whenever this paper was written, it was some Microsoft paper from, I think, early 2000s, I can't remember. You would have to literally continue the coloring on the boundary of that void created by the object you're trying to move and kind of in-paint progressively and propagate that into that space until ultimately it's fully removed and fully replaced with background. So it was pretty cool. Overall, I'm a fan of, today we do something with neural networks, but back in the day we had to be a little smarter about it. We had these cool algorithms. Let's go implement them to learn something deep rooted about the concepts of the field. And I think this project did that really well. I would say despite being very, very difficult, and some of the other things we'll talk about later, I enjoyed it a lot, and I think it was worth it. And the last part was scene carving. So imagine you have like a subject in center frame and then a bunch of like effectively blank space, whether that's a horizon or something like that in the background. If you're trying to stretch out an image and literally like append pixels on each side of the image, if you're trying to do that and you do that naturally, like as you might see stretching out an image in PowerPoint or something, you're gonna warp that central subject and it's gonna look weird. But what if you knew like what parts of the image were important right in the middle, which part of the images were not important like the horizon? Then you could just take the horizon and you could stretch that out, and it's less important if that stuff doesn't look as like visually realistic. And the stuff in the middle, in the foreground, well, that is preserved, right? And you can do this with, you know, the sides of a building or like a person or animal in center frame or stuff like that. And you preserve the shape of that animal while also stretching out the image into whatever aspect ratio you want. The scene carving assignment was fine. Like I would just say the way that they set up the structure made less good use of the different concepts we would be tested on than the object removal assignment did. So, you know, again, like this project was fine. I would say the only one that was really like aggravating was the GIFs assignment. Yeah, the rest of them were fine, even including the camera obscura. It was kind of harmless. Yeah, beyond these assignments and things, there was also a final exam that was worth 10% and a couple of quizzes. So total 100%, obviously. Yeah, I mean, you know, the final and the quizzes, as usual with OMSCS classes, were kind of meh. They were just fine. Yeah, not much to say there, to be honest with you. I'll talk about it more in the good, bad, and ugly. So this is my kind of outline of the content of this course, as well as the assessments. Now let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly here. Starting off with the good. So for one, I think a real strong suit of this class was the lecture content. It was very, very high quality. It went just in depth enough to actually like teach you something, because other classes I've taken previously, like they were so high level that you just wind up going and self-teaching afterwards. So they were just deep enough to actually teach you like some of the concepts of it, but not so deep and so detail oriented that it's just cumbersome and they're too long and blah, blah, blah. They were very well made, well produced lectures. So kudos to the professor there. Also, I would say the projects as a whole were a strong suit. Not so much the assignments. I mean, the assignments, I know I listed them all out green as good here, but they were just fine, right, for the most part. The projects, and specifically the object removal project for sure, were very, very interesting and hard, you know, hard but in a good way. And so overall, I enjoyed them and think they added a lot of value to the class, which is great. So yeah, so the lectures and the projects were very good, and the assignments were fine. So I'll just write like projects and assignments, because, you know, in a lot of these classes, the assignments are less than fine. So I would say that the assignments all being, for the most part, at least good, and then a couple of them reaching into that great territory was pretty impressive. So the quality there and the consistency was impressive. That's about where the good ends. Now let's get into the bad and the ugly. Okay, so for one, for reasons I will go very in depth on in the ugly section, there was really no community in this class. I did not talk to a single person throughout the course of this class. There was no activity in the Discord. It was practically dead. The instructors were not very responsive and didn't really add a lot in the ed discussions as far as I could tell. It was just kind of like very isolated. It was a solo journey, we'll put it that way, this class, which was a bit of a downer compared to the robotics class, which is kind of an, you know, entry class for a lot of people. It was the first class I took. Pretty responsive. The instructors were pretty responsive as well. And then the game AI class, there was lots and lots of chatter. Lots of chatter even aside from the actual assignments of the course. Like, people seemed to get along really well, and I engaged with that a good bit. But this class was a funeral home. There was just nothing going on, which was a bit of a bummer, and I'll explain why shortly. Beyond that, I would say the quizzes and final were pretty pointless, and this is not new. The written assessments seem to pale in comparison to the actual coding assignments, and you know, to be honest, I think that's part of what you get with this program. I don't really know why there seems to be this agenda that there has to be some kind of written exam in every class, because the strength of this program, in my mind, is the projects. I love these projects, and I just feel like the stupid little notebook quizzes and finals we have to do at the end, they're just pointless. That's why I list them in bad and not ugly. They don't really detract from the course a ton, but they're just annoying enough to be a negative thing, which is kind of silly to me, because one more project in here, or maybe an assignment that made better use of the video content, would have been really, really good. But instead we got notebook quizzes in Canvas, which kind of blow. This is the section of this video that I've been putting off for the better part of 2 months now. What were the ugly parts of this class? The instructors. There's a lot to talk about here. Overall, I found them very, very rude, very condescending in ed. Every response to any question in ed, which by the way, I never asked a single question in ed. So mainly for this reason, because I knew I would get pissed if I did. But almost every question in the ed discussions was responded to just in this very dismissive tone. Like, who is this stupid student bothering me? Like, it felt like the instructors just didn't want to be there. For the most part, there were obviously exceptions to that. In a lot of other courses I've taken, there often tends to be like a dialogue in a chain, like some student posts a question or something, an instructor responds, and then a student responds, an instructor responds, and a student responds, and there's just like conversation. Believe it or not, the edX discussion board does a half-decent job of fostering a community when it seems like the instructors running it are actually interested in contact with the students. And again, obviously this isn't true of every instructor, but for the most part, and for the ones who seem to be the most active, they were pretty dismissive of people and just honestly annoyed me and led me to asking no questions, which, you know, is not the way that I should operate. I should just kind of ignore it and ask my questions where necessary. But to tell you the truth, I knew it would just drive me nuts and I wouldn't learn anything, so I just kind of didn't do it. And that's the other thing, like their answers weren't even helpful. Like, it wasn't like they would just give you the answer and try to get you to buzz off. Like, they would give you virtually no information and try to get you to buzz off anyway. So yeah, that was kind of frustrating to watch, for lack of a better word. So the other thing here was that in just about every form of communication, they were very, very accusatory of the students. If there was an announcement about something, or like a heads up about an upcoming assignment, or the release of some grades, or anything, like just about anything, imagine that text, the actual core message, was 3 lines. There would be 10 lines above that part of the message of academic integrity warnings and violations of course policy and blah, 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 blah. And then 10 lines beneath it, right? Of all this boilerplate crap that really just felt like it was intended to scare students. It was very strange seeing, like, over and over and over again the reiteration of these academic integrity policies, which are just about the same as in any other course. They weren't revolutionary. The game AI one was pretty laissez-faire, but the robotics one, and I would assume like most classes, because I did go to college before this, most classes, they tend to have similar academic integrity policies, and this course's policy was not exactly revolutionary. It was just normal. Despite it being so normal, they felt this need to constantly browbeat students over and over and over and over again with these stupid academic integrity thing, and they would just be very rude, where they're just like, if you do this, that is a violation, and you are forbidden from doing this. If you use this package or use that or whatever, we'll fine you. Like, it was very accusatory and threatening and just hostile. I would say overall, the communication of most of the instructors felt pretty hostile, and that culminated the most, in my experience, towards the latter half of the class. I had a bit of a run-in with the instructors about project 1, which was a shame because I really, really enjoyed that project. I got a 0 on the assignment, and then this email that I missed because I was traveling for work, by the way, this email that I was being accused of cheating with another student. And the piece of evidence, I won't throw it here. I won't throw anybody's email on here, but the piece of evidence they provided were for loop, and 2 of them were for NumPy array indexing. And the way I set up this for loop and I set up this NumPy array indexing was eerily similar to another student's. Now, I'm being facetious here. There aren't that many ways to write a for loop. There aren't that many ways to access NumPy arrays, right? The colons and -1 to get to the last, whatever. These are very, very standard techniques. We are allowed to use NumPy, and it wasn't even like the variables were all the same. The variables were all the same and the characters were identical. It was literally just the lines, functionally speaking, served the same purpose, which was a for loop and accessing an array, which again, I don't feel like I'm deserving of a Turing Award for coming up with a for loop. This is not exactly unique, interesting stuff I was doing. And by the way, it was pretty fundamental to these algorithms, because Wherever possible, you're going to access and compute on NumPy arrays in parallel. That's the entire purpose of NumPy. And then wherever not possible, what's your alternative? It's a for loop over an image, duh. And so they send me this email. I go back and forth with the instructor, like, did you do this? Did you do that? Did you do this? Did you do that? It was like an episode of Law and Order. I'm going back and forth with this person for a week. And then ultimately they just say, you're good. And provide no justification, literally nothing. They just let me go, and they didn't report it to OSI, and that was the end of it. Hi, unhinged editor here. There were a few details I think I left out in my original recording of this, so I just thought I'd get them in after the fact. First of all, the resolution I got for this whole situation was I got the grade I would have gotten had I not been accused of cheating. So I had a 0 on Canvas originally. Once this was all sorted out, I think I got an 80 or something, but my grade was restored. Speaking of grades, I forgot to mention in this video as a whole, I got a B in this class, which honestly I'm pretty happy with, because after this whole nightmare, I was strongly considering just dropping it and moving on with my life. So I will definitely take a B over a DNF or whatever the hell it's called when you drop a class. Next thing I want to clarify, what I meant by it felt like an episode of Law and Order. What was weird about this whole thing was I got this message from this TA with a couple of snippets of what was clearly from an autograder, right? So this was not a human sussed out thing. Like some autograder flagged my stuff and some other kid's assignment as being too similar. So I get this email from this TA, and originally it's about colluding with this other student, this one person who also wrote, code that looks similar to mine. But immediately after that, the rounds of questions I would get every couple days over that week just expanded to a bunch of other stuff, like, did I use AI? Did I go on Stack Overflow? Did I message anybody else? Do I have any friends who have taken this class before me? Like a bunch of random questions that have nothing to do with the original accusation. And it really just felt like they were trying to get me to admit to something that I didn't do. And that's kind of what I mean when I talk about this hostility and just the really overall negative vibe, for lack of a better word, I was getting from this class. So yeah, that week of quote unquote Law and Order really was it just felt like them trying to meet some quota. And then the last thing I want to address here, to prep for this, I kind of was looking through Reddit and looking through other people's experiences with being accused of cheating. And most stories on there are people who actually got sent to OSI. I didn't get sent to OSI. And when people post these stories, a lot of people comment, even instructors and TAs comment like, oh, most cases that go to OSI, the person did it and they deserve it. And they're leaving out key context in the Reddit story. That's fair, I suppose. But what I want to know is, what about all the stories like mine of people who effectively just got harassed for a week for something that there was very little, if any, evidence of doing, that they didn't do. And then when they cleared their good name in the eyes of TAs and instructors, the whole thing was just dropped and they're left with this awful experience of the class and borderline dropping out and all this stuff. To me, just the culture around it seems like they're headhunting and seems like they're trying to meet some quota. Like if they don't throw a couple kids in the break, then people are going to think that they're soft on cheating, which clearly, again, from all the constant reminders of the academic integrity policies, I can assure you they were not soft on cheating. Anyway, just a couple of details I wanted to point out. I wanted to address the whole Reddit copium I keep seeing online. And yeah, back to paid programming. Or not paid. But it was just very weird. By the way, this was part of a mass sting op that they sent all of us. One of the more hostile messages of hey, we caught a lot of kids in Project 1, and if you're one of them, you got email. That was how I found out about it. If you're one of them, you got an email, and that's why you don't have a grade yet. All cases will be reported to OSI, which they weren't, by the way. It was just very strange. I don't understand what their motivation was for culminating such a weird, scared environment. And that was why nobody was interacting with one another in the Discord. The funniest part of that whole accusation was the thought that in such a hostile, unfriendly environment that they created, I would actually reach out to another student and try to work with them on an assignment. I absolutely did not do that. And nobody else did either. I think I sent 3 messages in a Discord server towards the beginning of the class about asking when something was due. And then after that, all the browbeating kicked in and I just kind of stopped, right? As did everyone else, as far as I can tell. So yeah, the thought that I conspired with other kids was hilarious because I didn't talk to anybody else because they scared the shit out of everyone. So it was just a very frustrating experience. And I made a video about burnout, and I made a video about how aggravating this whole experience was, really just talking in the broad strokes. I didn't divulge this part of the puzzle in that video, but I am here. It was just very, very frustrating. And I would say it's a not insignificant part of why I'm taking a break from the program. I mean, I was planning to take a break from the program anyway, just to regain my bearings after a bunch of life stuff. But this, if I had taken a great class or an easy class and everybody was friendly and I was enjoying the program, I may or may not have powered through. After this, I was like, screw this shit. And in fact, that was where I started to consider dropping. Again, not for this reason explicitly. There were other reasons that, again, I've alluded to in other videos, but this didn't exactly help. It just left a really sour taste in my mouth towards the end of 2025, which was a shame because the other two classes left really good taste and I enjoyed them a lot. And I'm really trying to focus on those while I make the decision of whether or not to continue. And rant. I've been putting off discussing that for a little while. You know, I wanted to wait for my grades to actually settle and be finalized and be rid of these instructors and these classes. I will definitely not be taking computer vision, in case that wasn't clear, because it's not worth dealing with this crap. And that was probably the most frustrating part of this, was as somebody who works in this field, as good as a lot of the lecture quality was and as decent as a lot of the projects and assignments were, I don't think the quality of the education warranted the way that they treat us, which no amount of high quality in an education can justify, but it at least might have felt like less of a waste of my time and stress, emphasis on stress, if the quality was a bit better, which I don't think it warranted that. And so yeah, that's pretty much all I'm gonna say on this. All right, let's talk about my overall rating. And I'm going to kind of separate what I just talked about with the instructors, because that was obviously a very subjective negative experience. And so I'm gonna try to do my best to separate the two. If you're gonna ignore all that stuff I just said about the instructors, which fair enough, I've done similar things before, ignored anecdotes and whatnot. If you ignore all that, I would rate this course like a 6 out of 10. It's fine. It's a decent class. I would say one of the things I should have probably written in negative is, again, as good as the lecture quality was, it was just like a lot of busy work and a lot of stuff to do. And so I don't feel like the learning to work ratio was particularly optimal. And so that's why I'm giving it like a meh score. When I think back to the robotics class, it honestly was not an insane amount of work, and it was an insane amount of learning, which was really, really impressive, and I enjoyed a lot. This one was kind of the opposite, where it was a good chunk of work and kind of fine learning. Really, most of the work was in the assignments, obviously, and the assignments were just fine, whereas the lecture quality was really, really great, but then never really elaborated upon in those assignments, with a couple of exceptions, like the object removal project, which ultimately wound up being a super negative experience for the reasons I just described, but whatever. Now, let's talk about the instructor part. If you factor in what I just described about the atmosphere of the class and my experience with accusations and stuff, I would rate it a 4 out of 10. If you're gonna take my word for it, it's just not worth it. Avoid this class and avoid these instructors, end quote. Quality was not there to warrant it. Quality was not there to make it worth taking this class anyway, and I would just steer clear. This averages out to 5 out of 10, which is pretty intentional. Like, you know, a 50 on an exam is not good. So I would say, even you disregard my subjective experience, which fair enough, this class was just kind of blah. Like, it was just fine. And if you're really, really interested in this stuff, which I was towards the beginning, to me, I don't think it was worth the headache, and I would steer clear. That's my opinion. Take it how you will. I'm the Unhinged Engineer. I make professional development content for young engineers like myself. I'm also vlogging this journey, so there's no vlog going on right now because I'm taking the semester off, and that will kind of go until like May or June. I've made lots of other vlogs about the first 2 courses and the majority of this one that you can watch. And yeah, I think while this was like a very low point of the experience, overall I think it's been a pretty cool ride. And so if you're interested in content about that, like, comment, subscribe. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you next time.